All right, thank you everyone for being here today. We're going to kickstart. Today is the 8th episode of AAL MICS. So that stands for AI Accelerator Lab, and we're presenting the Major Innovative Constructive Showcase. And what is it's a recurring interactive showcase that spotlights breakthrough work from founders and innovators in Asia and, well, in innovators in AI and adjacent creative fields. So each session is designed to foster exposure, meaningful connections, and knowledge sharing, driving both individual growth and collective advancements in the APAC innovation ecosystem. So today we are super lucky to have Provides to be doctor very soon, I believe. So Provides is an architecture designer and researcher known for her work at the intersection of metaverse, decentralization, and participatory design. So that's very cool. She is a lecturer at such a young age, I have to say. It's incredible. At the Bartlett School of Architecture, UCL, PhD candidate at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, treasurer of the Association of Computer-Aided Architectural Design Research in Asia, committee member at the Leisure and Cultural Services Department of Hong Kong SAR, associate member at Hong Kong Institute of Architects, and managing editor of BPro Prospectives Journal. I think I could go on forever with Provides experience, but why don't we take the time now to get to know her ourselves. So Provides, thank you so much for coming on. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. So, like always, we will start off the MICS with the first 10 minutes being a chit chat talk just to see how you're doing and what you're excited about. And then we go into 20 minutes of a screen share where you can share with us what you're working on. So, you're in Shenzhen right now. Are you working on a certain project?
Yeah, because I'm working with you for the UABB, and I'm trying to look for material sponsors and fabrication partners. So yeah, I came to mainland today for some meetings and stuff.
Yes, and for those who don't know what UABB is, it is the Urbanism Architecture Bi-City Biennale between Hong Kong and Shenzhen. And every 2 years we have one, but I think this year it is 1 in 3 years' time because I think we skipped the year for some reason. And I'm very lucky to be one of the curators mostly on tech and provides it's one of our very valuable, shortlisted exhibitors, and we were hoping to see how it goes later. And could you tell us a bit more about what it is like now in your niche, in your research? What are you currently working on and what's driving your research?
Yeah, so actually, in my research realm, for my PhD more specifically, I work on participatory design and look at how technology can help engage citizens within the design process. But the challenging question was that we are working in an ultra high density context of Hong Kong. So you can imagine, like in Europe, they've been doing housing for the past, like since the 1990s, and they're really good at sort of like ways in which they can make decisions together into like a low-rise housing. But for instance, on the public housing that I work with has 9,000 residents, and that's already like a mid-sized estate. And now you're asking 9,000 residents to make highly technical decisions on their domestic spaces. So that was one of the reasons why I think there's opportunity in leveraging metaverse tech where you can network multiple people in a 3D virtual environment, or maybe now more generative AI tools, people express their ideal living environment. So that's mostly what I work with.
And what happened in the past that made you realize this is the research that you want to dive so deep into? Like it's basically your life dedication now that you're finishing off a PhD on that. Did something happen? Was there an events in the past that made you realize, hey, this is actually what I want to do for life?
Yeah, that's actually a great question because before I came back to Hong Kong, while I was in UCL, my research was actually on blockchain. So ways in which we can decentralize also decision making, but using a technology that's inherently trustless, which means you don't have to trust anyone. You don't have to trust an architect. All you have to do is contribute data. And in turn, that data will be ranked in a system based on people's attention. So that was originally what I thought that I was going to do. But coming back to Hong Kong, what I realized was what we need is actually to build back trust. It's not to minimize communication for efficiency, but to maximize communication so we can work things out. And so the core idea is still to try and decentralize, but I switched to technologies that are more communication based. Yeah, so that was one like turning point for my study, and I'm willing to dedicate 4 years of my life on it because I somehow believe even if it's not in this format, but the behavioral study that I was working on, like see how people actually interact with computers, interact with each
Mhm.
other, design process, that will be the type of knowledge that I think even 100 years from now, we will still be needing to know.
In a way, it is future-proofing your career and also the way we communicate with participants. You're right. I think in the future, this is the direction to move forwards. I can't really think of other ways or how to go backwards. Interesting. Was there someone in particular that's also inspired you to go on this journey?
So many people, so many people. Obviously, my PhD supervisors, yeah, like Yubrun and Hendrik from CUHK, they're
Hmm.
definitely for a while in guiding me through the process, even though they might not exactly work with the same technology. But the core
Hmm.
idea is how you involve people in a professional and technically oriented process. And
Hmm.
they came from Germany and Netherlands. So cooperative design is a big culture there. So I learn a lot from them. But
Yeah.
even so back in UCL, like at the Bartlett, so Mario Karpel was also a very
Hmm.
well-known architectural historian. His book on
Hmm.
second digital turn actually wrote about the participatory turn in architecture. And so that was very
Hmm.
inspiring for me as well. Yeah, and actually, so I'm working as a lecturer at Bartlett, and my program supervisor and director was Molly Claypool and Jules Ritson. And they also built a startup on automated architecture that just got, I think,
Hmm.
3 million pounds angel investment. And the whole
Hmm.
idea was also how you can crowdsource effort and use automation as a way to train up low skill labor. So you can democratize architectural production from developer centric to community centric. And so all these people around me, they are really working to enhance social impact within real estate area. And I think that, yeah, has inspired me a lot.
Yeah, I can understand the different people coming from different cultures, different upbringings, and different education also help to nurture your direction and yourself as well. So it's very different to the majority of people who come out of architecture school and what they do. And right before we go to have the pleasure to see your work, can you tell us a bit more about the nonprofit that you have? If I'm not mistaken, you do also have a nonprofit organization. And can you tell us a bit more about how is that going?
Yeah, I'm actually in the process of the paperwork of applying for
Okay.
Section 80, which is a nonprofit in Hong Kong. But I do,
Right.
so all the project I work with NGO locally to try and see how the architectural workflow actually, blend with local
Mm.
community nonprofit work type. Yeah, so that was more integrated into my P project. Unfortunately, I will not be presenting on that one today because I just did it for the Hong Kong Institute of Architects last week. But yeah, it's a very special context because with every public housing at stake, and that's 40%
Mhm.
all over Hong Kong's housing, each one of them has at least one community center
Right.
locally integrated within. Yeah, so they have their own network of beneficiaries. So you have a lot of, for instance, retired older adults, even though they're about
Mhm.
50 years old, but they're still very active and they want
Yeah,
to participate and integrate in the society. And so I just
sure.
thought, in 20, 30 years time, I'll be retired. And we're the most rapidly aging society in Hong Kong. So 1/3 of the people would also be retired. What
Mhm.
do I want that retirement life to be? That we're just going to sit around and wait for people to assist us? I
Mm.
don't think it's kind of future. So,
Yeah.
and I'm building something to do with a book called Fully Automated Luxury Communism. And obviously, it's based on Marxist theory, but the theory is that in the future, automation should work for people. So we will be free to have a universal basic service in a
Mhm.
humanitarian area. And
Mhm.
that is also the thesis that I am building my NGO around.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I'm so excited to see what happens next. And we can also talk more about your future aspirations with the nonprofit as well as your academic works at the very end as well. Right. So, would you like to now share your screen and maybe we can have the pleasure to see what you're working on?
Yeah, so actually today I'm gonna present a bit on the Biennale work in
Okay,
yeah,
fantastic.
because it's related
Go
to
ahead.
you. So I'm
Okay.
also quite excited to share some of the work. Yeah, so we call the project Computational Biophilia, and it tries to explore resilient architecture through biomimicry design, biodegradable materials, also democratized co-construction. So we actually start the project by thinking about the intersecting challenge that Hong Kong is actually home to 5,900 marine species, and we are actually ranked 4th in terms of biodiversity urban areas. So it offers great lessons to learn as architect from the 3.8 billion years of evolutionary R&D from the Earth, that these species are optimized for Earth's conditions. And also, architects' design agency to resist the homogenizing force of generative culture is a real challenge. And a lot of times when we're using these image generation platforms, we easily disregard cultural motives because of data bias, but also because of the unawareness of designers' agents. And the third thing was that Hong Kong is actually a global connector, or wants to be a global connector, who facilitate over 800 major events annually. And that includes exhibition, conferences, performances, and biennale. And that contributes to over 10,000 tons per day of municipal solid waste. And so what we try to do is we are working with a material provider who makes which is a mild degradable material that can be degradable in soil or in marine environment. And we try to generate design that are optimized to that material, so then that can be used for events like Biennale. But of course, biomimicry design has been shown all over. So these are all from some Biennale around the world. And navigating through this work, they are aesthetically quite attractive, at least for me. They're usually sustainable in the way that they're constructed, but in a way it's also homogenizing, because, for instance, if we're building this in African context, Chinese context, Middle East context, would these designs actually adapt to local culture? So that's kind of one of the questions that I was asking myself. And also the term came from 1997, bio is life and mimesis is imitate. So biomimicry architecture should use nature as a model to inspire design, both form and functions, but also as a measure to gauge sustainability and efficiency. And finally, it should be a mentor from which we can learn about biological strategies for sustainability. And so reflecting on this, I put together 4 core ideas. The first one is biomimicry design. Second one is sustainable fabrication. And third is architectural co-creation, so we can embed contextual intelligence within the design process. And this is also based on a previous work. I work with my team on ways to develop contextual AI. And so we are a team of designer and researcher from all around the world. We were also colleagues at the Bartlett, and we're all good in very different software spaces. So the way we try to think about the problem is if we can find a way to translate knowledge bodies from different software space into a coherent whole that will be able to generate contextual intelligence. We also started with more conventional ways in an architectural process, identifying the site, being able to extract solar data, and help a pix-to-pix machine learning algorithm to learn from that solar data. So what you're seeing, this is more conventional solar simulation that you would see in Rhino Grasshopper. But what we did is that we actually discretized the spatial area into a series of voxel grids, and each grid will have a point that senses the intensity of solar instances. And with that voxel grid, we compresses that into a set of pixel data, what you see on the screen right now. And then we use this pixel data to train the machine learning algorithm. So the key challenge was that the solar understanding from the rule-based system has to be translated into the machine learning system. So we'll be able to repeat the same process for design iteration from hours of training to just seconds of pressing the button. And in this process, the rule-based system is a teacher to the machine learning system, or the machine learning system is a student that help automate a task more efficiently. So this is a diagram that summarizes our strategy. We start with the context simulation. We break them down into voxel grids, and then break them down into pixel grids. And then we upsample them again to voxel grids. And then we upsample again with each voxel as an architectural component. So this demonstration was previously made by Davi, and it shows what was happening with the machine learning agent navigating the voxel grid. And every time there's a solar instance, it will swap the voxel grid into a solar component. And so in that way, it's not just a form finding process, but actually the algorithm understands some sort of physical knowledge of the world. Yeah. So overall, the key is to use voxel as a method to train the algorithm. And with the upsampling and downsampling technique, we can compress the pipeline and give emergence to vastly different design results. This can be helpful to resist against homogeneous design and to incorporate community engagement in the modular component process. And we invited 20 architects from all over the world to use and test the pipeline to try and embed diverse contextual intelligence. And this is one of the results from an architect group who worked on Yemen. They realized that Yemen is a port city with a lot of discarded containers. And so they tried to upcycle the container with PV units, and each of the PV units on the facade of the container has to be oriented to a different direction so you can balance shading with solar harvesting. And they used the pipeline we provided for them to generate this tower results. Simultaneously, the same pipeline can be used to generate this more organic form. So this was inspired by spherical light harvesting devices. It was trying to learn from lichen, which grows natively as a plant, to harvest energy from all directions. Yeah, so they do the whole solar simulation, extract the data set of Peru into a machine learning training process. And then with that, they were able to automate a series of differential varying designs in a very fast manner. And the question is, what is the role of human in this automation process? Well, in the first pipeline, the human's role was to minimize computational load. So it used voxel as a proxy, and the designer articulate to resolve discontinuity between voxel units in the outcome. Whereas in the second pipeline, they actually first achieve a biological form and then discretize it into a voxel to enable the machine learning process. So as you can see, this is simply the example from two projects, but with the same pipeline, human can take diverse role within automation. And I think the key would be to understand in very, very specific technological pipeline, how can we diversify the role of architects? And I think there's potential to actually drive this experiment even longer and deeper. But also we tried to prove that this sort of pedagogical approach between algorithm would be beneficial in terms of efficiency. And so we realized that GAN, even though it takes 10 hours to train, but once it's trained, it generates result within seconds. Whereas if we use the traditional rule-based approach, because it will take 1,000 generations to achieve optimal design, and it will take 70 gigabytes for data storage. However, it's very good to work with context with little data. So for instance, when we were working with the Yemen or the Peru context, we couldn't find a lot of data online. And so rule-based systems are great in these contexts. Whereas GAN, even though it's very, very fast, however, it has to be in a data-rich context. And so we find it beneficial to actually make a combinatorial effort between the algorithm, but also between architects. So we've actually ran a lot of workshops all over the world and achieved so many different outcomes. And I try to sit and think, okay, what is the next step and what does it actually mean for us that now we can so efficiently generate so many different designs? And if we go back to the definition of contextual intelligence, it is the ability to understand and interpret the nuance of social, cultural, situational, and environmental dynamics in a specific context. And so it occurred to me that we only embedded environmental dynamics, but not social, cultural, and situational. And naturally, the next step for me would be to explore those aspects. And so with the UABB team, I tried to work with Yao Yao and Carlos. Both are super, super talented. Yao Yao is very good at robotic fabrication, whereas Carlos is one of the very talented digital designer who participated in one of our workshops. And so together, we're going to try and fabricate some of these components in real world and test their real world performance. We're also very proud to have material sponsor from MatchJ and J3D for their biodegradable material. And we're also working with Owen Child to try and optimize the 3D printing process with those materials. So I'll show a little bit about what Yao Yao does at BMA, which is also at the Bartlett. So she's a colleague of mine, and Bal ID. So they've been working with sustainable fabrication with robots, and they're also very good at a modular way, robotic and assembly. And I think our work fits together perfectly to try and adapt biomimicry design, sustainable fabrication, but also contextual intelligence. We had the idea that if we can modularize the entire process, we will be able to engage community in the whole fabrication pipeline. And in a way, we try to synthesize nature and culture through our biomimicry principles. And I'll show some very, very prelim work in progress. So we were trying to look at the cultural part of architecture. And I realized actually Chinese architecture does use a lot of biomimicry principle. We're just so used to it that maybe we didn't realize. For instance, this is the Shupai Dianzhu, so it's Suzhou style. And Suzhou is very rainy kind of area. And so a lot of the roof has this bird tail shape to try and send rainwater away from the tail. And that in turn protect the timber structure that it covers. And I also went on a field trip to Zhejiang, and then they have this Dongyang wood carving, which is one of the 4 greatest Chinese woodcraft traditions. And they also use a lot of biomimicry form to make their carving technique much more lively, representing the harmony of human and nature. And so we try to extract this geometry with a single image using AI platform. This is actually super simple, but the difficult thing is how we are able to manipulate the mesh and be able to optimize the structural loads with biomimicry growth strategies. And so these tests were done by Carlo actually just last week, very fresh off the oven. And the whole idea is that we'll be able to start with a 3D model, be able to fit that in any sort of spatial topology and then optimize the structural load. So we minimize the material usage. So like, for instance, be able to fit in dome-like surfaces or column topology or as a wall, etc. Yeah, so we try to manipulate and try to push the boundary of the mesh before it's too broken. And we also try to analyze the support and load to optimize it. We're also using the voxel approach because geometry complexity actually makes the optimization process quite slow. Yeah, and so you can see that this is just 10 iteration, but it tries to use a growth logic to extend from the native form. And I think it has the potential to actually integrate with the solar pipeline that we had before. So then we can optimize the form based on loads, but also environmental context. And then finally, we'll be able to 3D print that. And so in the future, we'll be able to, for instance, have columns that use very minimum material, still have cultural motives embedded inside, but be able to act as strongly as a column should. Yeah, so in the end, what we plan about the pipeline for the Biennale would be that we would co-design the modules with Citizen using biomimicry principles. We will adapt the 3D models onto architectural topologies. We'll 3D print that with biodegradable material. And finally, we will construct the column together with participants as well. Yeah, so just a final takeaway of what the significance of this is in Hong Kong, that in the future with intersecting challenging climate change, urban homogeneity, and digital divide, there is an opportunity to innovate against the odds. And so this project tried to contribute by working directly with communities to co-create more eco-centric environments. And we tried to experiment firsthand with contextual AI to understand the role of architect in the age of automation. And also by intersecting these challenges, we actually have combinatorial problem solving, that by hybridizing problems and the interaction, it could lead to new insights and solutions. Yeah, so if anyone's interested, welcome to stay tuned to the Biennale. I think we'll be releasing the official news next month, something. I think that I can confirm that.
Yeah, hopefully next month. That's right. Thanks so much for that. Was really good. I think it was a lot of different aspects you showed, and a lot of work, of course. And thank you so much for bringing us through that in a very clear way. There are a lot of questions I can ask and a lot of directions we can go towards, and I probably won't ask silly questions like how is this going to be applied in the real world, because I think we all know the constraints. And I think even I think the important thing is that we are all aware of the constraints. Like, you're very aware of the constraints, but you know that someone in the world has to push for something, and somehow if you shoot for a star you land on the moon. I believe that's kind of the understanding. So I'd actually like to ask more about the AI parts. I really like the learning from the rule-based systems of nature, and then making that as a teacher, training with that in machine learning into architecture forms. Can you tell us a bit more about how you test the performance of the output and how you assess it, actually, if that makes sense?
Yeah, actually, the solar approach originally was made as an assessment method. So it's almost like we now use the assessment method to generate design. But obviously that there is a big limitation in the research because it exists in a closed feedback loop. So the solar simulation was rule-based, which means that there is a formula how at what time in what place the sun will be this amount. But obviously that could be invalid within the fluctuation of climatic conditions and so on.
Yeah.
And I think also sense that in the urban development of Hong Kong, so every development has to go through solar simulation, et cetera, and ventilation. But when we walk on the street, we still feel like we're suffocating without any wind. So real worlds and simulated understanding of the world, for sure, there's a difference. If we're able to simulate that one-to-one, then we might be a simulation ourselves. And so the way to work around it, I think definitely now why everyone's talking about embodied AI, physical AI, it's because if AI doesn't have its physical counterparts, we would never be able to validate the result that we're getting from its generative and analytical part. So I think it's quite important, the fabrication process for the evaluation. And actually, if we look back to the history of artificial intelligence, if we go back to all the way to like 1950s, when cybernetic was still a thing, Norbert Wiener actually advocates sort of for physical AI. So the term didn't exist back then. But the way he think about it is that if you have an analog system or a mechanical system who would be able to simulate the same situation in real worlds, then the machine would be able to understand. And so he built a machine called the Moth, and it was to simulate when you have excessive positive feedback in a neural system, what would happen. So kind of like Parkinson's disease. So when the machine was tuned to receive excessive feedback, and so they would go like this. And so this validates the pathology of having Parkinson's disease. And I think that was a very important point in history about physical AI, but that we sort of forgotten about it because of the Cold War and because of the oil crisis. But I think now that neural network is it's much more developed than before, we are now facing the same problem again. And so these histories are being brought back increasingly. And so as architect, I think we've always been working with physical environments, and now is a time for us to understand the importance of physicality again, but in the context of digital automation.
Yeah, I like your references, and I feel like every time I speak to you, you're able to reference something that I've never heard of before, and I always find it very fascinating. Yeah, and I like the term physical AI as well, and it's true what you said in terms of AI cannot progress without the physicality of it as well, whether it's some kind of wearable or hardware or a built thing. I'm actually curious to know about something that perhaps is not directly relevant to our conversation today. What are you reading recently? I'm curious
What
to
am I
know.
reading recently? Because like in my day-to-day job, I have to read so much
It's true.
that yeah, now I don't. What am I reading?
No worries. The reason why I asked is because what you read reflects on your mindset or the period of time, or like it kind of sums up the phase in life, I suppose. Well, I guess you answered it because you're reading a lot of research papers, I'm guessing, for your PhD. So that's what you're reading. You know, the thing you read, either is nonfiction or fiction, it reflects on one's mindset and what that person is intended to do in a way. I kind of feel like that. So I always like to ask people, what are you reading recently? But yeah, you must be super busy with your PhD. And
Actually, if I can enjoy
yes.
like
Huh?
at my leisure time, I really like to read like what people write in the 20th century.
Really?
So like even if you don't understand I mean, even if I don't understand completely
Mm-hmm.
writing, I think it's interesting. So the Norbert Wiener that I mentioned, I
Mm-hmm.
always read what he writes. He's a
Oh,
and he first came up with the idea of information. And then it really situates you when you read again what people write today. Because
yeah.
today, academic paper is very functional. So it's
Mm,
very efficient. It only
yeah.
writes needs to be said. But I guess in the 20th century, they had more to actually write about their motivation and intention. Like, for instance, Clark Shannon would write about that the communication problem is entirely mathematic and it has nothing to do with semantics. And it was just looking at the probability of alphabets appearing in a sentence and encoding that in mathematics. That process for me, because they think about the same problem in such different ways. And
Yeah.
when you read in the footnote, you realize he was actually a student of Norbert Wiener. So that would be something that really fascinates me. Yeah, but today I mostly read the more functional academic paper.
Interesting to know. Yeah, I know what you mean. Okay, it's also interesting to know that in your lecture you'd also be interested to read something, well, kind of related to. Yeah, I know. It comes to a point where it becomes your obsession with what you work and what you think about in your daily life. So it's very different from a 9 to 5 where you can switch off. Sometimes we just can't. So I asked this question to all of my guests, which is a quite a fun one, I think. If you have to use one word to describe success, which word would it be for you?
For some reason, the first word that came into my mind is failure.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I don't think they're opposite, but as you said, many of the things that we do in the more avant-garde experiments right now, maybe 99 out of 100 are failures. Like failure both in a sense that it's not successful, but failure in the sense that maybe it's not the future that will be implemented. But without testing the 99 times, then you never know that that one thing is actually a more desirable future. So if you look at like Norbert Wiener example, like his experiments was completely forgotten.
Okay.
Today, after he's dead, it was being talked about again. So I think, yeah, sometimes I do ask myself, okay, if it's not buildable, why do I still do it? But just by looking at the career of past people, that I realize even if it's not buildable, doesn't mean there's no value in it. So I think success is to be able to dedicate to a subject that you trust has some value and fail many times and still be able to persist on that.
That's really beautiful. Getting goosebumps. I like that. Yes, I understand what you mean about even though you know what you work on may not become a built thing, it doesn't mean it's not valuable. It always depends on how you value what is valuable. And I guess that could be different for every individual and every culture as well. And it's important to find what is each person's benchmark. It sounds like you know very well what you're after. So I am going to open the floor up to any questions from the audience who'd like to ask to provide. So feel free to turn on your mic or send some questions through the chat. And while we're waiting for questions to come in, I will allow myself to ask providers a couple more questions while people digest the information and feel free to ask. So provides, other than the UABB, what is the upcoming thing, I suppose, that you look forward to?
I'll be submitting my thesis in 10 days. So that's the
Oh,
thing that I
wow.
look
Thank you.
forward.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on, even though it must be like a super tight timeline for you. And what are the plans after your submission?
I wanted to say take a break, but now looking at this because that's not possible. But yeah, one thing that actually always intrigued me would be to like Sino-futurism or Sino-accelerationism. So
Yeah.
for instance, the Chinese architecture that is like super timber-based and modular, how do we be able to bring that back as an architectural identity in today's time? So I think that's something that I've always been interested in.
Great. Well, then that could become another project under your nonprofit or another paper. So we've got a
Hopefully.
question. Yeah, we've got a question in the chat from Natalie. When you bring together architects, coders, and artists, there must be very different ways of thinking colliding in the same space. From your experience, how does that mix actually influence the kind of research and projects that come out of it? Oh, that's a very elaborate question.
I think I was very lucky because the people that I work with, we work so well together. And
Amazing.
we've been apart for the past 5 years because everyone's literally at different corners of the world. Because we're at this point, it's so used to interdisciplinary work. I
Yeah.
feel like everything that I've shown would not be possible if it wasn't being built together. So I'll give an example. For instance, Alberto Fernandez, like one of the super talented people that I work on. So he is very good at cellular automata. He actually does his PhD on this. And so he would identify a problem of the optimization process. And Davi, who is great as machine learning programming, and he would be able to say that, oh, I'll be able to automate this bit in your pipeline with my training process. And then we will have, like, for instance, Nicoletta coming in and she's super great in Houdini. And she'll be able to say, oh, actually, if we use Houdini, which is super native in voxel data point, we'll be able to automate that. So the whole process would be super fluent. And I'll be the one to say like, oh, maybe we can use this biological species to test out if the pipeline can actually do such design. But one limitation would also be because everyone is so native in their own software space, it will actually take a lot of time to try and blend things together. And sometimes there's actually an easy way to like go straight, but you would like navigate this before we understand there's actually a straight way. So I think it's the foundation to which we're able to innovate, but also we have to constantly keep an eye out to see if there's actually a faster way of doing things.
And it sounds like you're almost like project managing everyone's native talents, if that makes sense. Like the way you described it, it's like there are segments to your entire workflow, and there are different people good at very good at their own niche. And then when there's a project, you have to get everyone's efforts together in different processes and streamline it. And you are the person who is managing that, which means that you need very strong project management skills. And also, you need to have a certain level of understanding to an extent of what they're actually doing.
I will actually say that, like, I would always think that I am actually not as talented as my team members. And so, what I can do is to facilitate for them to have the best environment they can to make to work. So, instead of managing, I think I'm more like facilitating the process. Yeah. So, make sure that the right resources come in, make sure that we have the right organized, make sure that like all there's a theme connects to a larger discussion, and there's a regional contribution to research gap, and stuff like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like that we're facilitating. I also resonate with you. I think everyone who works with me is smarter than me, which I prefer. I know that I'm in the right place when everyone else is smarter than me, and I'm just like, I have no idea what you're talking about, but I'm so happy to learn. Yeah, so I think actually facilitating it's a better word. I might steal that word and use it from now on instead of managing. That does sound more realistic. Right, so let's see if there are any more questions. Feel free to ask, turn on your mic or ask in the chat. We can have a couple of minutes of Provide's time.
Hello, Provide.
Oh, hi.
Thank you for the presentation. Super interesting. I see there are a lot of like translations in your work where you, let's say, collect data from the solar and then turn that into the digital space into Grasshopper and then turn that into Rhino through maybe upscaling, downscaling. So you move in between digital and physical world a lot. I'm just wondering, is there a possibility of you to take a physical output as a starting point and then feed it back into the digital world? Taking the UABB project as an example, where you do a lot of cool things on Rhino, and then like taking a picture and then turn it into a digital model, and then in some way you manipulate the mesh, and then you create a physical 3D print. Is there a possibility where you take the final physical model and then bring that into a digital space and then further work on it, or I don't know, whatever you can do with it?
Yeah, it's actually a great question. Another group of people that I work with concurrent, we are taking a lot more of that path where we always like start with the photogrammetry of real world objects and make an assemblage of that in a virtual world. And I think now that has also the technique has advanced so much in like the past year. So before it was either you do photogrammetry or you do a LiDAR scanning. Photogrammetry, it's great, but you need to compute, and then LiDAR scanning is also huge. But this year we see a lot of artificial intelligence on like 4D splatting. So they would be able to take photogrammetry input and be able to generate LiDAR model based on that. And so we're actually experimenting with that. And just I think 2 months ago it came out where you can like if you be able to take a video from multiple vantage point off, and it can turn into 4D splat with a time scale. So it will be able to animate and record the point clouds in real time, which is crazy. So actually in that research group, we're testing some of these pipelines. We're also trying to think about if we are able to reconstruct reality from multiple vantage points, there's an opportunity to actually authenticate truth of an event. So if we think about, was it a Greenwich Tower in London that like a whole fire, like a huge fire, and they actually scrape a lot of video online to try and understand at which time the fire started breaking out to reconstruct the forensic event. And I think that was an example when cameras actually authenticate each other in the reconstruction process. And for architecture and any sort of urban events, definitely we should make use of that, not just for social event, but like that video game called, you remember the cathedral got burned down in Paris?
Notre Dame.
And Assassin's Creed actually reconstruct the same cathedral in different periods of time. And architects were able to take that reconstruction as a reference to build the cathedral back. So I definitely think there's operational archiving that can help us better understand architecture in a time spectrum.
Thanks so much for that. Bosco, does that answer your question for you?
Yeah. One more question. I also know that you do a lot of like 3D printing. I'm not sure if it's like a personal project or it's your job. I'm just wondering if you have to choose, well, do you prefer working digitally or physically? Because I saw you doing a lot of 3D printing.
3D printed handbag.
Those.
Obviously, this is like a hobby. Like when I have nothing to do, I just like random 3D printed stuff. What was the question again?
Do you prefer working or
working physically? I guess as an architect, you like train as an architect, you always feel like you need to build something in the world. So I want to work physically, but at the same time, I love to work digitally. I think digital is definitely the future. So being able to go both ways, take lessons from both worlds. Yeah.
Did you just say phygital? Like with
Fidget.
they merge two words together?
I didn't come up with it. So it's actually a word from marketing, digital marketing. They do a lot of
Really?
digital personalization.
Phygital.
Yeah, is how you trace the lifetime of your customer. So then you can push the right message to the right person at the right time. So that marketing is
see.
not just digital or physical. It has to be paired.
Right.
Because they would treat that person all the way. And I think we can, so the thing about interdisciplinary research is you will start looking at ideas from other fields and start asking yourself, what does it mean for architecture and urban design? And I'm not marketing anything, but the way that data is translated back and forth, back and forth, back and forth through the lifetime of a design project, I definitely learn a lot from, those ideas.
Great, thank you so much. I think phygital is definitely a new terminology in my dictionary, at least. And once there's a terminology for a new idea, then more concrete thoughts can be formed. So thank you so much for opening up that door for myself. Bosco, do you have any follow-up questions? Feel free. We might have a couple more minutes.
There's no more from me.
Thanks for your questions. Maybe I can ask one to Adeline.
Okay, sure, go ahead.
Yeah. So how do you define success?
Wow, that's cheating. Cheating that you asked. Actually, I don't have an answer right now. That's why I asked. It's because I don't know yet, and I think I'm looking for it. So it probably wouldn't be right if I say an answer now because I really don't know yet. I'm figuring it out, and I'm referencing everyone that I talked to. So for guests who came before you, some had said journey, some had said timing. There had been a lot of like a wide range of different answers. I think I'm still searching because it's a thing that I wonder, what it could be, and it's different for everyone. So I'm still thinking about it for myself. It could be happiness for others, and it could be like failure, which is I think is a very resilient way to look at success if you ask me. So ask me again in a year's time, I might have something for you.
Nice. No, I think not knowing is also a great answer, which means that there's a lot of space to actually develop. And I think that's the most important point, because if one day you find out that there's no way you can improve again, then that's very scary. So I think, for me too, always trying to see where I failed so I can look for more things to improve and work.
Yeah, and I can understand. I see that. Great. Provide, thank you so much for your time. I know it's late, it's almost 9 now on your end. And thank you also for dialing in, even though you're in Shenzhen and I think you have to use a kind of VPN to get to us. And thank you so much. And let's see what happens next. And hopefully we have good news for the public in September, right?
Yeah, looking forward.
Yes, hopefully. So thank you so much. See you. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye.